Garrett McKinley's breath caught in his throat the moment he saw the figure by the creek. He blinked hard, once, twice, thought maybe the heat had drawn a ghost out of the dust and memory. But no, the man was real, still, frail, sitting alone like some forgotten monument, hunched over a stick, the sun catching in his long silver hair. He looked like he might blow away with the wind, but he hadn't. He'd come here, onto Garrett's land. Garrett's throat tightened. His fingers curled tighter around the reins. That creek, the one that carved through his property like a lifeline, had watered his cattle, washed his father's blood from a shattered hand, held his mother's tears during the year of the drought. This wasn't just land. It was sacred. It was his. And this man, this ancient Apache, was sitting by it like he belonged there more than Garrett ever had. He spurred his horse hard, fury rising in his chest like thunder. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us. Each step closer stirred memories he'd buried. Stories his father had told with whiskey on his breath, about raids, about fear, about the years when a fire at night meant you didn't live to see morning. But none of those stories had prepared him for this. For a man so old, he looked like he'd seen the land before the fences, before the wars, before Garrett's very name had meant anything. He dismounted fast, boots hitting dirt like a verdict. "You're trespassing," Garrett said, voice low, tight. "You need to leave." The old man turned his head slowly. His eyes were not defiant. They were tired, sad, deep like a well that had never once run dry. "The water," he said softly. "It remembers." Garrett stared at him, stunned silent. Then, as if the words had drained the last strength from his bones, the old man tried to rise. His hand gripped the stick. His legs wobbled beneath him. For a moment, just a moment, Garrett thought he might make it. But then he crumpled. He hit the ground with a sound Garrett would never forget. Not a cry, not a scream. Just a gasp, fragile, final, like breath leaving a bird's wings. The old man lay still, one hand stretched toward the creek. A thin line of blood trickled down his forehead. His chest rose and fell, shallow, shaken. Garrett couldn't move, not because he didn't care, but because something inside him, the part he'd buried under barbed wire and long days and unspoken grief, was breaking open. He remembered his mother, hands trembling as she poured water into a stranger's cup, whispering, "Kindness is stronger than fences." The wind rustled the cottonwoods like a morning song, and Garrett McKinley, rancher, son, survivor, took one step toward the man he didn't understand. Because something had called the old Apache to this place, and maybe, just maybe, it was calling him too. The old man's hand trembled as it reached for the walking stick. His fingers curled around it with more reverence than strength. Garrett stood rigid, arms crossed, watching with a scowl that was beginning to crack around the edges. He told himself he didn't care, told himself again and again. But something about those sunken shoulders, the way Elin Red Hawk braced against the ground like gravity, was dragging him into the earth. It stirred a quiet dread in Garrett's gut. The elder pushed himself upright with slow determination, exhaling as if each breath cost him something. He took one step, another, and then a sharp crack, a twisted root beneath his boot, a cry not of fear, but pain, raw and human. Alan collapsed. His body hit the dirt hard, bones first, like a sack of dry twigs. The stick rolled from his hand. Dust rose around him, slow and ghost-like in the heat. Garrett's breath caught. He didn't move. He wanted to. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, but fear, of what he wasn't sure, pinned him like a stake through the chest. Maybe it was the fear of being seen helping a man like this. Maybe it was the fear of how it would feel to care. The old man didn't cry out again. He just lay there, one hand clutched to his side, lips parted in a silent grimace. Blood, thin, bright, threaded from his temple and caught in his hairline. Garrett took a step forward, then stopped. Walk away, he thought. Let him crawl out. That's what men do. That's what he would do. But Alon wasn't moving, just breathing, shallow and sharp, and it sounded like something was rattling loose inside him. "Damn it," Garrett muttered. He dropped to one knee beside the fallen elder, his shadow falling across the cracked earth. "Don't make me regret this, old man, Mbu," he said, mostly to himself. He reached under Elan's shoulders and tried to lift him gently. The Apache winced, hissed in pain, but didn't protest. His body was light, fragile, not just with age, but with hunger, with hard years that had stripped away everything but bone, skin, and pride. Garrett half carried, half dragged him beneath the largest cottonwood tree, lowering him to the softest patch of grass he could find. The old man's breathing steadied just a little. Water, Garrett thought. He uncapped his canteen and held it to Elan's lips. The elder drank slowly, deliberately, as if the water meant more than relief, as if it meant survival. When it was done, Elan looked up. His eyes weren't full of gratitude. They were full of something harder to bear. Recognition, as if he saw through Garrett, saw everything the man had built around himself, and knew it was made of straw. Garrett stood, angry at the silence, angry at himself. He didn't know why he helped. He just knew this. The old man wasn't going to die alone. Not today. Not here. The sound came first, a distant rumble, low and rhythmic, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Garrett froze, hand hovering near his rifle. He turned his head toward the eastern ridge just as the tremor grew louder. Hooves, many, fast. He stepped back from the old man's side, heart pounding against his ribs like a warning drum. Elan lay still under the cottonwood, eyes closed, his breath shallow but steady. Garrett looked down at him, then up at the rising dust cresting the ridge. His pulse skipped. They were coming. 10 seconds later, the first horse broke through the dust. Then another. Then 5 more. 8 riders in all, sweeping down the hill with terrifying precision. No wild shouts, no chaos, just silence and speed and deadly intent. Their paint-marked faces were unreadable, their eyes sharp. Spears strapped across their backs, rifles across saddles. Their horses moved as one, as if the land itself parted to let them through. Garrett grabbed his rifle. He didn't raise it, not yet. They fanned out as they approached, circling the creek with practiced formation. Dust kicked up around them in ghostly spirals. The lead rider dismounted before the others. A tall man, younger than Garrett expected, broad-shouldered, hair tied back in a thick black braid that swayed as he moved. He carried himself like a man who'd never needed to shout to be obeyed. He walked straight toward Garrett without hesitation. Garrett's throat went dry. The rifle in his hands felt suddenly too heavy. The man's eyes dropped to the figure under the cottonwood. The moment he saw his father, bleeding, still, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. He said something in Apache, a single word. Garrett didn't understand it, but the sound sliced the air like a blade. Elan stirred weakly. His lips moved, voice cracked and dry. The younger man dropped to one knee beside him, placing a hand gently on his father's chest. Elan whispered something else. The son listened, said nothing, then stood slowly and turned to face Garrett. "You are the one who found him." Garrett nodded, unsure if speaking would help or damn him. "You drew your weapon." "I didn't aim it," Garrett said quickly. The man's stare didn't waver. "Not yet." Garrett's fingers tightened on the stock. "I gave him water," he added, "brought him to shade. He fell on his own." Silence. The creek burbled beside them as if mocking the tension. The man stepped closer. "I am Tomas Redhawk." Garrett swallowed, hard. The name settled in his bones like cold steel. "My father trusted this place enough to return to it. You will tell me why he now lies bleeding in your dirt." Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it again, because nothing he said next would come without consequence. Garrett's mouth was dry as dust. He could feel the weight of every Apache eye on him, waiting, judging. The only sound was the soft rush of the creek and the creak of leather saddles as the riders shifted, ready for any wrong move. Thomas Redhawk stood like a mountain in front of him, silent, unmoving, the air thick with expectation. "I found him here," Garrett began, voice tight, "sitting by the creek. Didn't say a word to me at first, just stared at the water like it was some kind of—" He caught himself, adjusted, like it meant something. Thomas said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "I told him to leave," Garrett admitted. "This is my land." He didn't argue. Tried to stand, he fell. He looked over to Elin, still lying beneath the cottonwood, his chest rising in shallow, steady rhythm. "I didn't touch him, didn't push, didn't threaten. He fell on his own." Tomas slowly turned toward his father, crouched beside him again. He spoke in Apache, his voice low and full of something Garrett didn't expect. Concern. Real, raw concern. Elin murmured something back, too soft for Garrett to understand. Whatever was said, it shifted something in Thomas's face. He rose again. His eyes pinned Garrett like a knife. "My father confirms what you say." Garrett let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed through him, but it didn't last. "He also says you offered water," Tomas continued, his voice like flint scraping steel, "that you helped him to shade, that you could have walked away and chose not to." Garrett nodded, unsure if he was being thanked or warned. Thomas looked around the land, the trees, the slow-moving creek. "This place is old," he said. "Older than your deeds, older than your fences. My father came here for memory, not malice." Garrett's pride flared. "He still crossed onto my property." "And now he is broken," Tomas snapped, his voice rising like a storm. "Broken on your soil. In our ways, that means something. You carry responsibility now." Garrett stepped back, instinctively shaking his head. "He needs a doctor, a bed. He can't stay here." He will stay," Tomas cut in, each word sharp. "He cannot be moved safely. We will care for him here, on this land, until he is strong enough to leave." Garrett's fists curled. "That's not your choice." Thomas stepped closer, his shadow long across the dirt. "It is not yours either." The two men stared at each other, one born from dust and barbed wire, the other from blood and stories older than maps. Between them, Elin Redhawk lay still, the bridge neither of them had wanted, but now couldn't walk away from. Whether Garrett liked it or not, the reckoning had begun. Elin's breathing had changed. It came in short, shallow pulls now, each one thinner than the last. Garrett heard it even before he saw the sweat beading on the old man's brow. The way his hand trembled as he reached for water and couldn't lift it. The shade from the cottonwood did little to cool him. Something was wrong, deep wrong. Not just broken ribs. Something inside him was bleeding or failing or both. Thomas crouched beside his father, fingers gently brushing Elin's forehead. He listened to the breath, the tremor, the silence that followed it. Then he stood and faced Garrett with that same stone-set calm that made his voice hit harder than any shout. "He needs medicine," Thomas said. "White medicine. A doctor." Garrett's jaw clenched. He didn't want to say it, but the words came anyway. "You won't get one, not from town, not for him." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because the only doctor we've got is Morrison," Garrett muttered. And Morrison, he doesn't treat Apache. He never has. He wouldn't even treat a child after the winter sickness hit their camp last year. Thomas's face didn't change. Then you will make him. Garrett took a step back. He won't listen to me. I'm not exactly on his Sunday dinner list either. Then you won't go alone. Tomas turned and gestured to one of the younger warriors, a man with sharp features and steady eyes. Swift Arrow will ride with you. The warrior mounted before Garrett could argue. His war paint was still fresh, a line of red slashed across one cheek like a wound that hadn't healed. Garrett stared at them both, caught between fear and obligation. You send me into town with him, he said. We won't get a doctor. We'll get a funeral, maybe mine. Thomas stepped closer, his voice low, final. If my father dies here, Garrett McKinley, there will be more than one funeral. Garrett's hands twitched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to shout, to run. But then he looked at Elin again, so still, so fragile. And something in him cracked. He turned to his horse, swung into the saddle. Swift Arrow rode up beside him, bareback and silent. You think threatening Morrison will change his mind? Garrett asked as they kicked into a gallop. Swift Arrow didn't look at him. Not threatening, he said. Only reminding him that life is not always his to measure. The wind howled around them as they rode toward a town that feared the very people Garrett now rode beside. And behind them, beneath a cottonwood tree, a life hung in the balance, caught between old hatred and one last chance at grace. ChatGPTZ. The hooves tore across the ground like thunder, pounding out a rhythm of urgency that Garrett couldn't silence. Dust rose behind them, thick and bitter, catching in his throat with every breath. He pushed his horse harder than he ever had, but Swift Arrow rode beside him effortlessly, bareback, steady, silent. The Apache's face never changed, not even when they crested the hill and the town came into view, bathed in late afternoon light like a lie dressed in gold. Garrett didn't slow. Main Street wasn't ready for what hit it. Two riders, side by side, one white, one painted. The townspeople turned fast, heads snapped, doors half closed. Women pulled children inside. Men stared, hands drifting toward pistols, uncertainty crawling up their spines. Garrett saw it all, felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. But he didn't stop. He pulled up in front of the whitewash clapboard building that served as Dr. Morrison's home and clinic. Without waiting, he swung down and slammed open the door. "Morrison!" he barked. The doctor looked up from behind his desk, startled. The surprise twisted into scorn the second his eyes landed on Swift Arrow, stepping in behind Garrett. "What in God's name?" Garrett didn't give him the chance. "There's a man dying on my land. You're coming with us." Morrison stood slowly. His voice dropped low, cold. "What kind of man?" Garrett didn't flinch. "An Apache. Name's Elin Redhawk." Morrison scoffed. "You've lost your damn mind. I don't treat Indians." Swift Arrow stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked Morrison dead in the eye. "Elin Redhawk is not just a man. He is a father. He is a leader. If he dies, his people will not ask questions. They will not write letters. They will ride." Morrison paled. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. "I didn't threaten you," Swift Arrow continued, calm as still water. "I am explaining what will happen. Your choice is not whether he lives or dies. It is whether you stand beside justice or in its way." Garrett stepped closer, his voice hard now. "He's on my land. That makes it my responsibility. And if I'm held to it, you will be too." The doctor looked between the two men, one painted in the symbols of an old world, the other carrying the weight of a new one. Something shifted behind his eyes, not compassion, Not even decency, just fear. "I'll need my bag," he muttered. Swift Arrow nodded. "It's already packed, in your buggy." Morrison stared. "We came prepared," Swift Arrow said simply. As they walked out, the town watched. No one spoke. No one dared. Garrett mounted up, high, heart pounding, eyes on the road home. Because this ride wasn't just about saving a life. It was about everything that would come after if they failed. The light was fading by the time they reached the ranch. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, deep purple, angry red. Garrett dismounted first, boots crunching the dry earth as he rushed toward the cottonwood tree. Elin still lay there, his breathing shallow but steady. Propped up on blankets the Apache warriors had arranged with surprising care. Dr. Morrison stepped down from the buggy, stiff-backed, his face set in something between disgust and duty. He didn't speak as he knelt beside the old man, didn't look at Thomas or the warriors who watched him like sentries, just opened his bag and set to work. Garrett stood a few steps away, watching every movement like it might explain something he hadn't understood before. The way Morrison's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from knowing this body might break beneath his touch. The way Tom's never blinked as the doctor checked the wound near Elin's ribs. The quiet between them all, heavy as a storm. After a long silence, Morrison sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. 2 ribs cracked. One punctured the lung, but not all the way. He's lucky, or stubborn. He looked at Thomas, then Garrett. He needs rest, medicine, no travel for at least 2 weeks. Thomas gave a single nod, nothing more. Morrison packed his bag quickly, eager to be gone. When the doctor left, the silence lingered, thicker now. Garrett cleared his throat. "He'll need care," he said. Thomas turned to 2 of his warriors, Swift Arrow and another named Running Bear. "They stay." Garrett nearly objected, then looked into Elin's face, pale, lined, dignified even in pain, and simply nodded. The first days were stiff, awkward. Garrett worked his cattle with one eye on the warriors. He didn't speak unless spoken to, but the men, especially Swift Arrow, weren't interested in posturing. They worked. Swift Arrow moved like he belonged to the land, quiet, quick, almost invisible among the mesquite and stone. He spotted a broken fence post before Garrett did. He found 2 strays caught in a gully no one had touched in years. And when the storm hit on the 3rd night, it was Running Bear who read the wind before it spoke, guiding the herd to higher ground and saving half the season's stock. It unsettled Garrett more than any threat, because they didn't ask for thanks. They didn't talk about justice or debts or power. They just helped. And in the stillness of those long, hard days, Garrett saw something he hadn't expected. Honor, restraint, pride that didn't need to shout to be heard. One night, as they sat near the fire outside the bunkhouse, Garrett looked across the flames at Swift Arrow. "You always know where the cattle go?" Swift Arrow smiled, just barely. "We've been watching longer than you think." And Garrett, for the first time in his life, felt the flicker of something dangerous. Respect. The fire cracked low in the pit, casting long shadows over the cottonwood trunks. Garrett sat with his boots stretched toward the embers, nursing a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hands. Alan Red Hawk lay bundled nearby, propped against folded blankets, his breathing easier now, his voice stronger by the day. Tonight, the old man had asked to sit closer to the fire, said he wanted to feel the heat on his face. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the hiss of burning wood and the soft stir of wind through the leaves. Then Elin spoke. "Your grandfather was a hard man," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the flames. "But fair." Garrett turned to him slowly. "You knew him?" Elin nodded. "He had a scar here," he said, touching the bridge of his nose. broken by a mule kick. Walked with a limp he never talked about. Garrett blinked. That was true. His father had told him that story only once. He came to our camp once, Elin continued. In the drought of '62, the creek here had run dry. Our horses were dying. He found us 2 miles east, camped beside a dead arroyo. Elin's voice grew softer. He said water belonged to the earth, not to men. Then he led us here, let us water the herd, said it was the decent thing to do. Garrett swallowed, hard. My father never told me that. Maybe he didn't know, Elin said. Or maybe he didn't want to remember. The fire popped, sending a swirl of sparks into the night. Garrett stared into them like they held answers, but all they did was rise and vanish. You didn't come here by accident, he said. Elin turned to him, his eyes full of time. No. Garrett felt the weight of it settle over him like a second sky. This land, his land, wasn't just marked by deeds and titles. It held memories. Moments passed between men that had nothing to do with fences. His grandfather, the man everyone called hard-edged and narrow, had once offered kindness in the middle of suffering. And Elin had come back to that place, not to take it, but to remember it. Garrett's throat tightened. I thought you were just trespassing, he said. Elin gave a faint smile. Sometimes memory walks farther than maps allow. Across the fire, Swift Arrow and Running Bear listened in silence. Neither interrupted, neither needed to. Garrett sat back, heart pounding slower now. He thought of the barbed wire his father had stretched, the rifle always by the door. He thought of the stories built on fear and silence. And then he thought of his grandfather, guiding thirsty horses to a creek he didn't claim as his own. Maybe that was the truth buried under all of it. Not who the land belonged to, but who had remembered what mattered most. The dusk came heavy that evening, thick with the smell of sage and horses. Garrett stood at the fence line, one hand resting on the weathered post, eyes scanning the horizon where the hills bled into a bruised sky. He knew Thomas was coming before he saw him. The silence had shifted, grown sharper, more watchful. Even the air seemed to brace itself. Hooves approached from the east, steady, unhurried. And then Tomas Redhawk rode into view, his silhouette sharp against the dying light. He dismounted without a word and walked toward the fire, where Elin rested, eyes half closed. Swift Arrow and Running Bear rose to greet their leader, but Tomas gave only a small nod. His focus was on Garrett. They stood facing each other across the fire's orange glow. No rifles, no challenge. Just two men with too much behind them and even more ahead. My father says he is strong enough to ride soon, Tomas said. Garrett nodded. He's tough, stronger than most men half his age. Thomas didn't smile, not exactly, but something in his eyes softened. Things are changing, he said. The railroad's coming, new settlers, new laws. This land will not stay quiet for long. I know, Garrett said. My people will be affected, pushed again, but so will yours. A lone rancher won't survive the storm, nor will a scattered band. Garrett looked at him wary. You're not just here to say goodbye. No. Tomas crouched beside the fire, picking up a small stick and drawing lines in the dirt. Your land borders our winter range. Your cattle could graze in the valley where the snow melts first. In summer, our horses could shelter near your springs. We could share routes, share watch. Garrett stared at the fire, his jaw tight. A partnership. Thomas nodded. Built on the memory of kindness and the understanding that the world will not wait for us to stop hating each other. Garrett hesitated. He could already hear the whispers in town, the names they'd call him. Traitor, fool, worse. But he also saw Swift Arrow guiding strays home, Running Bear predicting storms, and Elin, dying, then living, under his tree. And he saw his grandfather, long dead, leading thirsty horses to water in a land where fences hadn't yet choked the creek. "You trust me?" Garrett asked. "I trust what I've seen." A long pause. Then Garrett stepped forward, extending a calloused hand. Tomas rose and took it. No papers, no promises, just a grip. Firm, unflinching. Something old passing into something new. ChatGPT's eye. The mornings came softer now. Garrett stood in the pasture watching as Running Bear led a group of calves toward the feeding station, his movements calm, sure, almost like he could speak to the herd without saying a word. Swift Arrow was at the south fence, hammering in new posts with the kind of precision Garrett usually only trusted to himself. They didn't need orders anymore. They moved like they belonged. Like this place didn't just tolerate them, but welcomed them. It had been 3 weeks since the handshake. In that time, more had changed than Garrett could name. The ranch ran smoother. Cattle were healthier. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. The Apache had brought with them not only skill, but a way of reading the world that Garrett had never been taught. One based on signs, on stillness, on listening. He'd shown them bloodlines and feed schedules. They'd shown him how to see what was already there. And somewhere in the middle of it, Garrett stopped watching them like threats. He started watching like a man learning from his equals. Alan had healed. Slowly, steadily. Each evening, he took a few more steps on his own. Sometimes he'd sit by the fire and tell stories in that slow, graveled voice of old hunts, lost brothers, long winters that carved bone into memory. Garrett listened. Not out of politeness, but because he needed to hear them. They made the land feel deeper somehow. One night, as stars bloomed overhead and the flames cracked low, Aylin turned to Garrett. "My grandfather once said," he began, "when two rivers meet, they do not fight. They make a stronger current." Garrett nodded slowly. "Hard to believe that with everything I was raised to think." Ellen smiled gently. "And yet, here we are." Swift Arrow passed him a mug of black coffee, and Garrett took it, feeling the warmth settle in his chest. Tomas arrived just after dusk, as he often did now, his horse blending into the night until he stepped down by the fire like he'd always been there. "We heard in town," he said, setting his rifle beside the log. "Rail crews are a month out." Garrett didn't look away. "Then we've got work to do." Tomas nodded once. No fear, no hesitation, just purpose. That night they sat long after the fire had burned low, the stars watching from above like old friends. Stories passed from mouth to mouth of cattle drives and spirit dreams, of fathers who had failed and grandfathers who had forgiven. The lines between them blurred, not erased, but softened by understanding. In the silence that followed, Garrett looked at the men around him, Apache and rancher alike, and felt something settle in his bones. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it, and that was enough.